we'll move straight to the State of Electricity panel. So help me appreciate our panelists as they come to stage. It will be moderated by the Esak chairperson, Eddy Njoroge. A round of applause. In the panel, we have Edouard, who is the MD Business Development, Head of East Africa for Globeleq. We also have in the panel from the utility, Engineer David Syengo, who is also the acting GM for Network Management, Kenya Power and Lighting, makofi kwake. Another one is our member, Kipeto, Allan Munyua, CEO, Kipeto Energy. We also have CEO of IberAfrica, Henry Muthanji, and we are supposed to have Engineer Kipeto, but he'll join us once he gets into the room. Wacha tuwapigie makofi wakikuja. We are all set.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our first panel this morning. You have seen it's really a great panel with developers, utility, everybody is here. The format of this will be, I'll ask them a few questions, and more importantly is that we will have time that we can be able to discuss with the audience. So it will be fairly short. This is really looking at the state of the electricity in Kenya. And again, the stage has been set. Rosemary has talked about it. In my opening speech, I also talked about it. But we have this gentleman. Unfortunately, we are not gender sensitive in this panel. But we have this gentleman to really set the stage and to look at what is happening in the sector. I'll ask them one general question as they introduce themselves. Each one of them will introduce themselves. But the question I would want them to answer for us to understand and to see where the sector is if you were appointed the Minister for Energy, you know, the President is making the address today to the nation, and he appointed you the Minister for Energy. What is it that you would really want to see happening in this sector? So introduce yourself and then just generally answer that question. Minister Muthanji.
Thank you, Eddy, and good morning to all. My name is Henry Muthanji, CEO of IberAfrica Power, one of the first IPP in this country, and we are still powering the nation. Today I'm the Minister for Energy, as appointed by the appointing authority. So we'll be fired maybe right after this. What would I do? I think I would speak to the policy on how energy, the source of energy that will propel this country to become a more powered country, a policy that would create sustainable power development that drives not only the lighting and small industries, but would attract other consumers. What am I saying? Currently, our country has various sources of power. We have fuel as part of the energy. We have biomass. We have LPG. We have electricity. And all these then do not attract sufficient investment. I would pick one source and say, Kenya going forward will be powered through electricity, for instance, and then we get the investments that generate electricity in cost-effective and reliable manner to all consumers and attract industries into our nation. Thank you.
Edouard?
Thanks, Eddy. So my name is Edouard Wenseleers. I work at Globeleq, in charge of business here in Kenya. Globeleq is an Africa-focused IPP, as you may know, owned by BII and Northland. In Kenya, we are operating the 40 megawatt AC Malindi solar plant, which hopefully we can expand with 𝐾𝐽 at some stage, and then also building a 35 megawatt geothermal plant in Nakuru County. Very briefly, if I was the Ministry of Energy, I would frankly try and make sure that sense of urgency that you discussed this morning, Eddy, is understood by everybody, because we are at that stage, and it's not a joke. So I'd really call for moving from talking to action, and not reinventing the wheel on power purchase agreements, bankable and risk allocation. This country actually has a fantastic history in getting these projects done. At this point in time, we need to just capitalize on that to do more. A lot of credible investors in the room, a lot of, good stakeholder engagements, but I think now it's time for action. So if I was the ministry, I would focus on action, ASAP.
Thanks, Chairman. David Syengo is my name. As I said earlier, I'm the Acting General Manager, Network Management at 𝐾𝐽, taking care of dispatch currently, transmission operations, distribution operations, and also, of course, as my senior has mentioned, commercial, that is retail, as is encapsulated in the Energy Act. If I was minister, two things. One, and it might sound a bit operational, is to find very concessional funding for two big plants. One is the Grand Falls, projected at around 700 megawatts. I'll give reasons for that. It's not just for the energy only. And the second will be, and it's in discussion, a load following, whether gas turbine plant or whoever is fast to deploy. That I'm just speaking to that because of the great level of instability and the power quality issues that we are facing currently as a country, and which we think need to be closed, or even the voltage control equipment, STATCOMs, which our sister agency 𝐾𝐽𝐿 is fast tracking. So why I'm saying concessional is so that, as of course we know, it will come to the tariff, it comes at a much reduced impact for the countryman. Of course, the second one will be to find and make sure there is policy alignment. There is a lot happening in the sector, as has been spoken of in the earlier presentations. We have generation, we have regulatory targets for growth, which then determines tariffs. At the same time, we have policies that are seeking to indeed deepen utilization of renewable energy. And as Chairman said in his speech, trying to find an alignment that keeps a balance, if I can say that, so that if we have revenue requirements, for example, that keep the tariff at a certain level, they are met without, having them shaved off and so on. So that will be my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. My name is Allan Munyua from Meridiam, and also sitting here in my capacity as the CEO of Kipeto Energy. So Meridiam is a long-term investor in infrastructure projects, so across energy as well as transport, so roads, ports, airports. If I was to be the Minister of Energy, possibly I would attend an event such as this, and and I would appreciate from engaging with the audience some of the, let's say, the role that the private sector can really play in supporting the government to ultimately deliver, let's say, reliable power to customers as they need. I would imagine I would be working within the framework of an administration seeking to also, the same things I think all players in the political sphere speak of. How do we increase jobs? How do we improve production? How do we grow the consumption, and ensure that even as we do things on government's part, tap this resource called the private sector to see how it can support that vision. Thank you.
Thank you. Allan, as while you're still on the floor, I will pose this question to you as Kipeto. You have just said that you are the MD of Kipeto. And therefore, my question would be, what lessons have we learned in terms of the opportunities and the challenges there are in integrating a huge renewable project like Kipeto onto the grid?
Thank you, Chair. So Kipeto is, for those who may not know, Kipeto is a wind farm, a 100 megawatt wind farm, just about 70 kilometers from here in 𝐾𝐽𝐿 County. So we are blessed with, let's say, a very good wind resource. Our capacity factors are just about 50%, which for wind is quite impressive. Of course, I don't see them anymore, but of course you have Lake Turkana, which is much larger, which is larger than us, with even more higher capacity factors. So we are blessed with that. But why in addition to this is that we are literally, it's a 1 hour 45-minute drive from here. It's in an area where there's an industrial corridor. So all the way from Athi River going to Isinya, there's a lot of industry that's setting up there. It's an area where people, there's a good population that lives around. So we are very blessed to be producing power right next to this critical load center. That's Nairobi and the wider Nairobi area. Meridiam acquired this asset in 2023. And of course, we from the team that we found and the discussions we've had, and even as we continue to operate this plant, we appreciate that from Kenya Power side, there's been a lot of learning and effort to ensure that there's good coordination between the producer, that's ourselves, and them to be able to receive the power. We don't control the wind, as we say in our motto, I guess, within the company is God gives us the wind, and it's our job to produce every kilowatt hour we can with it safely and reliably, and ensure that we're able to communicate what we see ourselves producing in a very timely manner with KPLC. Over time, I think this process is a lot smoother. We appreciate and understand from some of our operators the initial challenges that were faced, because in the next hour, because you do hourly forecasts, in the next hour you could be forecasting 60 megawatts, then suddenly you receive a gust of wind that's going to carry on for the next 30 minutes, and you need to ramp up, and vice versa. So those from a challenge perspective, those are some of the challenges. From if we were to sit back and appreciate it from Kenya Power's perspective, and also some of the comments that we've had here, we do produce a lot at the peak, so from 6 p.m. Thereabouts, but also through the night. So for us, I believe we would love to pursue opportunities with Kenya Power, with 𝐾𝐿 and so on, and with the sector at large, to also see how this power can be effectively utilized. Because I made a comment earlier that it's in our priority is we are as concerned about the health and the robustness of KPLC. So we certainly want them to be able to sell all that we produce, to remain for the model to keep working. So yeah, we are happy to be here and happy to be one of the people.
Thank you very much, Allan. Let me move now back to Henry. As you heard, Henry is from IberAfrica, the HFO IPP, which has been there since the first IPP in this country. Henry, talk to us about the importance of diesel generation in this country. It has been seen as if it's the most expensive power. It should not be in the grid. If you ask some of these people, it should be shut down and it shouldn't be there. Talk to us about the importance of diesel generation and why you are at it. Could you also talk to us about, and I know you talked when you are the minister, and now that you're not the minister, talk to us about which areas Kenya should prioritize in terms of procuring new capacity in order to achieve the balance that we have been looking for, which is cost, reliability, and of course the transition from HFO plants.
Thank you, Chair. I would start by giving maybe the participants in this meeting a background history of IberAfrica. Back in 1996, there was a lot of power shortage, 94, 95, 96. And we came in as emergency power generation with a 7-year PPA ending in 2004. That time, 2 power plants came into play. That is IberAfrica, and there was a barge in Mombasa that was decommissioned or moved out in 2004. That was Westmont. So we came in to plug in a gap in generation, and the plant, 44 megawatts, was constructed in 9 months. And we were able to power the nation with 44 megawatts of power within 9 months period. So a thermal plant is able to be planted. From financial close, you can take between 9 months and 12 months to have a power plant fired into the grid. So the speed is one element that speaks to the necessity of thermal plants. Number 2, we are able to place thermal plants wherever there is high demand. If you look at demand centers like Nairobi, Mombasa, we'll be looking at maybe Eldoret going on. You are able to position whatever size, whatever capacity may be required in that area to support the grid within a very short time. Therefore, you require small space for thermal plants to be able to operate, and within also a short time. Other elements that are important is when we have frequency drops within the system, what our colleague has said about wind. Now you have wind, very high speeds. In the next 30 minutes, you have nothing. Thermal plants will give you farm power that stabilizes the grid through and through. And you can be able to segment the dispatch according to demand. If you have a 100 megawatt thermal plant and you have 10 units of 10 megawatts each, you can fire 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, or until you get the full plant capacity. Therefore, you are able to segment depending on the demand. Therefore, thermal plants will be able to follow the demand curve so that you do not have maybe power wastage. It's also secure. Within between 15 and 20 minutes, you can be able to ramp up from 0 to full load within a very short time. That way then, at the emergency situation, the thermal plants in this country has assisted in the restoration of the grid, whether we have a failure of the transmission line, maybe we have a geothermal plant that is out, or we have a line that has broken. Thermal plants then plug in very fast to bridge that gap. And of course, we find currently, when we are procuring all the thermal plants in this country currently, one of the requirements was to have the thermal plants being convertible. If you look at IberAfrica, Gulf Power, Triumph, Rabai, Thika Power, we can convert them from HFO to LNG as long as that molecule is within the country. We have done feasibility studies and we know how to power these plants using LNG should it become available in the country as a future market, as a future source, which is maybe slightly more cleaner than the HFO. On the other issue that was raised as to how Kenya can procure new capacity that speaks to cost, reliability, and what was the other thing? Transmission. I would ask myself, as a nation, what are the available local resources that we have? We must focus on exploiting every local available resource that we can lay our hands on to generate power. And that way then we can be able to size the capacity of the power generation capacity that we may require into the future. And I would put them into two baskets. One, the renewables. We have wind and we have solar. I think that area is an area that we have a lot of resource that is still unexploited. But it brings in the challenge of the intermittency of that technology. So while we invest more in the renewables, we must then also provide backup power that is firm. If you lose 100 megawatts of wind, where do you get 100 megawatts of firm power into the grid for that period that the wind is off? The next basket would be the more cleaner but firm that can provide baseload generation also. And we are looking at geothermal and, of course, hydro. Hydro here, we are saying, even going to the future, there will be competition between agriculture and power generation because farmers are also drawing from the same rivers water for irrigation, and therefore less and less is going to our thermal, to our hydro stations or the dams. That will impact in the long term, maybe on the hydro generation. And therefore, those are the locally available resources. There's something that is never spoken about in many forums. We have coal in this country, in the Mui region of Kitui. And that coal is a resource that we can use for power generation. Coal currently, we have technologies that are cleaner. You are able to capture all the frying ashes, and the frying ashes can be used in the cement factories as a composite to making cement. Why do we bury coal forever in this country, whereas it can be exploited and we reduce the cost of importing fuels? It will also power the economy, the e-commerce that we're talking about, e-mobility. I think that's an area that people need to focus into, and I ask ourselves, do we have the capacity, technology exists to go into coal generation? Of course, funding will be an issue because in the international finance markets, many people will not finance coal projects because they are considered to be dirty. But we have local investors who can venture into that and complement other power generation. So I think those are some of the things that I would be talking about.
Thank you very much, Henry. Yes, we need to look at what resources we have and how can we exploit those fully. But as we had said, the issue is our transition goals, our NDCs and what we have declared, but maybe we can pick up that a little later. Let me now move on to Edouard from Globeleq, which you said is a Pan-African company. Obviously, therefore, you have a view of other countries involved, for instance, in the Southern African power pool, even West African power pool. And my question to you, Edouard, is how do you see Kenya? How is Kenya positioned to participate in the East African power pool market? And what needs to be done to ensure that we unlock that as quickly as possible and make sure that, yes, we can start trading within the East African power pool?
Yeah, thanks, Eddy. That's a very good question. I mean, the question you're asking is Kenya's competitiveness. There are various ways to look at that, but I'll try and look at it from a perspective of how Kenya fits in the wider region here. I personally believe that Kenya is competitive and has very strong fundamentals to be even more competitive. And so I just want to, it's a very wide question, I would say, but I would focus on some of these key fundamentals and then also look at some points of attention. I think to me, and this energy family Baraza is a good testimony of that. Kenya has a unique track record in getting the private investment done in a bankable way in the generation space. There is that history, the track record, the maturity level here of the sector is unmatched if you look around in East Africa, if you look around with the neighboring countries. And I think that's a big asset, which often we underestimate. A second thing is obviously, and my colleague has just said this, but Kenya is endowed with vast renewable energy sources. One of which is quite key in this competitive team is geothermal, obviously, because geothermal, as we all know, is renewable, produces affordable power, but most importantly, baseload power. That's also not weather dependent, right? And that actually gives the country what I call a merit order advantage. If you project yourselves in a situation where you're trying to export power, trade with your neighbors, having that very lower marginal costs of electricity, these high quality electrons that you can place in the grids in the region, I think is a fantastic advantage that this country has. Plus, of course, as can be shown in 𝐬𝐭𝐫𝐿 and now also at Menengai, you've got a lot of experience that Kenya has built over decades that is also even important, exported, to the neighboring country. So I think that geothermal advantage is crucial. The third one, obviously, is the location. Kenya is at the heart of the East Africa power pool region. There are interconnectors built already with neighboring countries. There is trade ongoing. And that actually, from a kind of location physical perspective, is an important advantage. Now, I don't think we can rest on our laurels as Kenya. And there are some points of attention in my view. First of all, we've discussed this morning, but we are a bit at a crisis point where supply hasn't really followed demand, and there is a clear need to put more capacity on the grid to cope with this reserve margin issue that we are all aware of. And that, is kind of directly linked to the bankability points. Competitiveness is driven by bankability. And so there is a bit of an urgency in my mind to get those additional projects done ASAP to make sure that, in fact, when you're projecting yourself in a more integrated system, you're on the exporting side of the equation and not on the importing side of the equation, let alone all the geopolitical considerations that come with importing power from Uganda and Ethiopia. Again, maybe another point on competitiveness. The predictability and the stability of, for instance, the fiscal regime is quite important for investors. This is just to say that let's make sure we capitalize on this maturity in the energy sector. Let's make sure that the policy-making people understand the importance of continuing on that trend and on that path to then reap the fruits from the wider integration within the East Africa power pool. Because there is a clear opportunity, and I think Kenya is uniquely placed to seize it. However, this will also then mean, in my sense, more investments into the grid. I think we will, as Kenya, truly benefit from the integration if we are able to, one, modernize the procurement framework to get more project done, modernize the grid and improve the grid connections to be able to just have the tools to trade that power, and then be competitive, and focus on the bankability of the project. So that's what I would say, Eddy. I'm a developer. I'm optimistic by nature. I'm a firm believer in Kenya, but there are clear challenges that need to be addressed. The good thing is the country is very well positioned. It would be a shame not to benefit from that position and that advantage to integrate it in the wider region.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question on that. As somebody who has got a view of what is happening, for instance, in Southern Africa, do you see an opportunity from if the wheeling was properly, the transmission that you have just talked about, if it was there?
Yeah, so I mean, I wear two hats with Globeleq. On the one hand, I'm in charge of business in Kenya, but I'm also in charge of our business in the Copper Belt, Zambia and DRC. And let me say a few things here. As in Lusaka last week, it's this country now where you've got 4 hours of power every day. That has a massive impact on people's livelihoods, right? That's a massive impact on the economy. Obviously, their issue is to do with the drought and the fact that the water levels are low. But if you look at then South Africa, where they also went through some severe rationing of electricity, this is not a theoretical risk. This is actually affecting everybody, whomever you are and wherever you are in the country. In fact, if I look at Zambia now, because of this crisis, what you can see in terms of the acceleration of the liberalization of the market is fairly impressive. It's, I think I've seen investors here. Zambia is becoming a bit of a hot topic for all of us because it's a country where the government, to cope with the urgency of the power situation, is fast tracking. And when I mean fast tracking, it's actually happening every day. It's fast tracking the enactment of these wheeling regulations, the open access regime, and the market is responding. And I'll link it to another point, which is capital is liquid. Investors will invest money where they can make a decent return and where the opportunity is there. So if I can tie this point with the Kenyan conversation, where there is a real need to fast track projects. If you have a country like Zambia where the country is pushing investors to come and make sure that all the laws, all the rules are there to really cut the timeline to develop projects, there is a real risk that the capital will flow to countries like Zambia or others. And I wouldn't want this to happen for Kenya, obviously. But in summary, I think the market liberalization trends in Southern Africa, and particularly in South Africa and Zambia now, because of the crisis they went through, has actually been a key enabler of more investment. So I wouldn't want us to, as Kenyans, go up to that level of crisis that these countries have faced. But, these are kind of my thoughts on this thing.
Thank you very much. Let's now move to Engineer David, obviously, who is seated at the center of it all the things that we are talking about in terms of power supply, and also the one who takes from the generators. And David, my question to you would be more on the issue of the demand and supply profile. It's obviously a very, very difficult balance right now. And I know even Engineer Rosemary said that Kenya Power is responsible for the least cost power development. And when we look at the planning that we have had, the least cost, and even all the projections that we have had various numbers being put across to a point now we don't know whether it will be 9,000 by 2030. There was a time we were talking about 100 gigawatts. We have talked about 43. Not too sure. So it really must be very, very difficult. And therefore, my question to you would be, as you look at this changing demand supply profile, what adjustments are needed within your planning systems to make sure that we capture the demand, especially, and also that we have sufficient supply to meet that demand?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's a good question. The current projections, and I'll not want to go to the 2043 ones that are in the East Coast Power Development Plan. To 2030, we are looking at about current growth rate 6%, best case in the current tariff control period about 8% year on year. So on the timeline of 2029, 2030, we are looking at around 4,900, 5,000 megawatts in terms of what will be the installed capacity, but the peak demand at the time to be at around 3,000. I'm talking conservative figures. For planning, we use the pessimistic side. But if we have, policy changes, like in the case of where generation will be developed without tracking the demand for the sake of probably attracting more people here, then the numbers could change significantly. But that's what we are looking at. And I'm talking about figures that have a reserve margin. I think, Chairman, you mentioned earlier that our current reserve margins are around 5% at best. Sometimes they shrink to below that. But for the 5,100 megawatts projected for the next 5 years thereabout, we are talking about a reserve margin of about 13% to comfortably operate the grid and be able to offer quality and reliable supply. I also want to mention something, and so that we look at the grid, and as we talk about the need to procure more generation, it was mentioned earlier that once we go off peak at 10 p.m., we have almost 2,000 megawatt of plant that is not generating. So, and even as the president said, more recently that sparked a lot of debate. We're talking about the 6 to 10 p.m. window being the most severe. If we are to make adjustments, and maybe if I can also just look at the June-July period that we've just crossed, and so that I make the point about what we also think is driving the current peak demand, because it then goes off after 10 p.m. At best, it is a lot domestic that has got a bit of captive during the day. A bit is SME that doesn't work late into the night, that has a bit of captive that comes in at peak. Let me explain. In that June-July period, we actually saw the peak rise within the 2 months, I think about 2 or 3 times. To mean that anybody with a lot of captive solar will then require to, the daytime demands approaching around 1,800 megawatts. And then once the sun goes down, everybody comes to the grid, creates that quick demand, then it goes off. So that then the off-peak demand is remaining almost at 1,100 megawatts. Sorry. For the last about 1 year. So that's the kind of the grid that we're operating. So when we come now to the power supply demand balance, in the severest terms, and allow me to speak to reality, because when you run the grid, you don't want to go very far into projections. That the current then biggest challenge, if we were looking at a power planning scenario, will actually be peaking plants. Okay, so we take care of the peak, then we go off. Otherwise, whatever you procure as base load, as long as it's available through the 24-hour period, then that goes into consideration in terms of costing and otherwise, and or in the case of geothermal, which we are seeing very prevalent now, venting of steam. So in terms of the adjustments, the biggest factor we think is supposed to be considered right now is to try and have a very good match between the baseload and the VRE plants that are coming in. To mean that, and I'm talking about also taking care of power quality. As I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, that's one of the biggest thing, and I'm happy the regulator is here. In the regulatory benchmark targets that the utility is given to keep in terms of power supply reliability, one, for example, is to make sure the frequency of interruptions is at a certain number per annum. Durations of interruptions, which is a response issue. I'm saying that to say that, for example, in the last 12 months, the impact of load shedding, under frequency load shedding related to VRE is approaching the region of 11%. So if we look at all the interruptions and about 11% of them are now coming because of the VRE. So in terms of planning, I think a match between baseload, because as the baseload becomes stronger, we are able to get more VRE comfortably and not the other way around. At the moment, 635 megawatt of VRE on a 3200 installed capacity, we are talking about 20%. And that is installed. During the day, it shoots up to around 32% because we are looking at solar and wind being available at night. Wind available only, we are talking about 25%. So national control dispatching and looking at making sure that power is at the right quality, frequency, and otherwise. So in terms of planning, and with this evolving demand profile, we think then that match is very crucial. The second bit, we as a country over the long period and even in the LCPDP, we haven't been very keen on, and I know the regulator is finalizing the ancillary service study to help the country begin accessing ancillary services for purposes of power quality stability. Now, our challenges on voltage regulation and frequency regulation are very big as a country. It is then necessary on the planning side, the adjustments that we have were proposed to be made is a quick, fast tracking of what I will call grid level ancillary services for purposes of voltage and frequency control. The East African Power Pool that has been mentioned here, the consultant who was doing the readiness study for the 13 countries identified one very big factor, that of the 13 countries, only 2 were doing what we call primary frequency control. And that's Tanzania and Egypt at the time. I think now Ethiopia has, we really installed a lot of SVC equipment to kind of stabilize the grid. For Kenya, we do not have what I would call grid. Okay, I know with a lot of transmission lines that KETRACO has done in the recent past, a lot of reactors that have come in, but the demand profile is such that the requirement is outstripping what is installed. So we will have a big need for STATCOMs, SVC equipment, at whatever level, load following plans to help us, manage the variabilities and so on. So in terms of adjustment in the planning, those will be very, very, I'll call them actually urgent needs. That's why I talked about the gas turbine or the big plant, of course, will take longer. Lastly, Chair, and in terms of adjustments, I think when we look at the whole profile, the cost element, everything we are talking about installing, the energy sector does not have investments that come, at the moment transmission is, that come government financed, but that don't hit the tariff. So we think that to still keep the tariff at a good level, there would need to be some level of government or concession of funding level investments that will really still cushion that as we go towards seeking a lower tariff. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. It's now time for the audience to participate in this discussion. Before we come back to the final round of questions to the panelists, as you speak, please state your name, the organization you represent. It can be a comment, can be a question.
Alvin Mokaya from Mokaya Leadership Consulting. I'm a business strategy consultant, but I'm getting to learn quite a lot in this energy sector, and I'm interested to know from David and maybe any other panelists can chip in. What is your thinking about nuclear power? And I know, Henry, you talked about coal. I beg to disagree a bit. The technology is not clean. Why would we go back to coal when we also have potential for nuclear? Why can't Kenya ramp up efforts and through the support of the energy sector, which is represented very well here today? Why can't you lobby so that Kenya can go the nuclear way? I think it will have so much potential. And I saw the president the other day say that we cannot industrialize if our energy is not sufficient. And we do agree that if we are really to become the first world country that he's so rooting for, then we cannot do it without the energy that is sufficient. So what do you think about that? Or is there any other way that KPLC can enable this energy to be more sufficient so that across the 47 counties, we can take jobs closer to the young people by having industries set up in the grassroots?
My name is James Ngomeli. I was hoping to see the members of parliament here with us. But maybe that's another forum. My question is, I'm sure this function has been brought up because of some changes that have happened in the legislation, and I was hoping you'll be able to touch on it. What is the key thing that you think can accelerate the process? And secondly, from your Globeleq, when you are discussing PPAs across Africa, is it as problematic as this country, or is there any way we can learn new things from that, from your experience globally? Thank you.
My question is on to Mr. Henry Muthanji on coal. There's a conversation that came up on coal, and maybe Engineer 𝐬𝐭𝐫 can comment on it, because there are some tests that had been done on our coal in early years that it is not very appropriate in production of energy, and maybe with advanced technology, maybe it can be now be used, but initial studies showed it cannot be used. Also, on the natural gas, will it be cheaper in the current state compared to renewable energy due to the cost of generation? We don't have natural gas currently unless we import from Tanzania. Will it be cheaper importing the natural gas and then producing power? And maybe in relation to using maybe green hydrogen, which will be cheaper and be considered considering now in the lifting of moratorium, we cannot go beyond 7 US cents.
But you asked the question of nuclear, and I'll request any panelist who would want to tackle that. Then there are one question to Henry on the issue of coal, which has also been repeated by the last speaker. And then there's a question to Globeleq, to Edouard, in terms of what he sees within the sector. So anybody who wants to tackle the issue of nuclear?
Thank you. I think on nuclear, because the question seemed to have been directed to me, the ministry through the Nuclear Energy Power Agency, NUPEA, has in place the plan to install a nuclear power plant. It's in various stages. Of course, as you know, it has many local and international requirements to meet, so government is handling that. So I wouldn't want to comment on the view of, but we know nuclear to be a very stable power source. Part of the limitations of fast tracking is the smallest size of plant that can come in almost at around 1,500, 2,000 megawatts. But those plans are in place. I think last I heard, the sites already identified in Siaya County and plans underway for that. So I don't know whether the question was in whether we want it or not. I think even by virtue of definition, the 2018 Energy Act created NUPEA. So 2019 Energy Act, which means the aspiration of government even prior to that was always there. And even the creation of the agency training is happening. We have a lot of engineers from the country who've been trained mostly in Korea on the technology. They've come back to the country as the country becomes ready for those implementations. Thank you.
Anybody else who would want to tackle that question on nuclear? Nobody has done any nuclear. Yeah. Let me just comment a bit on that. Yes, nuclear is one of the modes of generation that we had looked at before in terms of can it fit within the East Coast Power Development Plan? And yes, it could fit. And as you have seen, there was an issue whether it should be put down in the coast. And now they have said the coast people, the community around where they wanted to put it, said no. And now there is a move to move it to Nyanza, somewhere in Siaya. Personally, from where I sit, yes, nuclear, with all the safety measures that there are, can be an alternative. Our biggest challenge at that time is the smallest unit of nuclear power plant, which is economically viable, was too big for our system. And I'm not even too sure if that has changed even today. So you cannot put up one unit, which is 900 megawatts, in a system which is only 3,000 megawatts, because if that unit goes out, then it means you have about 20% of your supply out. And that's why the new PR was formed. So Kenya is still on that path that yes, if the demand is growing and we cannot, we don't have any other resources, there is no reason why that should be left out. And then now hand over to Henry about 𝐶𝐽. You obviously touched on a subject which is very dear to some of these people. They don't feel that 𝐶𝐽 is an option. Please defend it.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting that we look at coal from this side of the region as something that is totally unacceptable. Kenya, 90% of our generation is clean, meaning that we have geothermal, we have hydro, we have solar, and we have wind as source of energy. 10%, 12% is thermal. And therefore, when you look at that composition, when you focus on electricity generation, we are saying that our generation is 90% clean. Countries like Germany, with the crisis in Europe, the war in Ukraine and Russia, people are reverting, even in the US, they are reverting back to reviving their old technologies. In fact, in Germany, I think there is a new coal plant under construction if it's not commissioned as yet. Meaning that technologies exist. In China, coal is still being used, but there is new technology to make the emissions, because the only problem with coal is an impact on the environment. And I had stated, if you arrest the ash, the frying ashes, that can be used as additives to other commercial activities, then, and you can use lime, which is available locally for scrubbing the sulfur in our coal, because I think the coal in Mui has 2.5% sulfur. Therefore, that's a little bit high. But you can use lime, which is available in Kajiado, ship it there, and then arrest all the ashes. You'll have clean power, and it becomes farm power. Other sources of farm power would be nuclear, as it has been mentioned. And we also have LNG, which can produce, we can import LNG from Tanzania. We can have LNG storage in Mombasa that we import from maybe the Arab countries, Qatar and so on. And that then we can have combined cycle generation in Mombasa. And LNG then can be used by other industries that are currently struggling with power or source of energy. The glass industry, anybody who is in food industry will use LNG, and it can also be commercialized and used for domestic use, where we have piped gas in residential developments that are coming up. All the apartments can have a cylinder or a cryogenic tank and then you can pipe gas to all the consumers in that development. So coal is not bad. It is how you use it, how you mine it, and how you then address the issue of the erosion of the environment where you're mining. That is the issue. And technologies are there. My take on this, as much as it's not agreed by many, for us to develop as a nation, we must build local capacity of power generation that powers other industrial concerns. Imports are subject to geopolitical situations. And as we have heard, Ethiopia with their 6,000 megawatt hydropower station, they are giving concession rates currently to attract investors to come and invest in Ethiopia. But once you are locked in, it's difficult to walk out. And maybe this is an opportunity and an eye-opener even to KPLC. Can we have strategic discounting of tariffs at night? You sort of attract those who are willing to invest here, consume power strategically at low pricing. When Ethiopia goes back to commercial price or the real cost of generation, you have locked your customers here, and those who are in Ethiopia will also be looking at the other option where power will be cheaper than Ethiopia. So I think let's not dismiss coal at the moment. I know it will be difficult, Chairman, to fund the project, but it has to be done if we are to have reliable power and exploit all the resources available in this country.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Edouard?
Yes, so I think the question was around PPAs in other markets. I think that's, again, a bit of a broader question. And again, I think PPAs need to also be understood as one instrument in the whole, risk allocation structure that makes sure projects can be banked. But if I can take two examples here. So South Africa, for instance, has been a country that's done extremely well in bringing private investor in the renewable energy space. And the few ingredients there of their REIPP program was that they would look at large-scale projects with bankable PPA and a sovereign guarantee, actually, that was already accepted by all developers, all lenders, and then also a very clear and transparent process of procuring that capacity. And the result of all of this is, one, they got projects relatively quickly done, and developers actually to put some significant bonds on the table to basically deliver by required timelines. The other consequence was that the tariff reduced dramatically over time, and that you now have thousands of megawatts of renewable energy in the system. Of course, it brings its lot of issue, and actually even the PPAs round by round had some changes. But my point here is, if you basically put the right ingredients from the onset, again, focusing heavily on bankable project documents, a clear and transparent procurement process, and, sizable projects, you get actually the private investment to flow quickly in your country. Let me go to another example, which is, closer to here and closer to my heart, so to speak, because I was leading a bid in 2019 now in Ethiopia. IFC scaling solar, sites completely developed by the IFC with all the studies done. They went for a process of asking for bids, and initially what everybody thought would be bankable project documents were changed last minute. There were some key risks that were not addressed. In the case of Ethiopia, this was mainly around convertibility and transferability of the hard currency. The result of that is, yes, they got very cheap bids in, but the projects never got done. We are now in 2025, about to reach 2026. The private investment hasn't flown in Ethiopia. Of course, they got Renaissance done, but again, if you kind of don't put the right ingredients in place from the onset when you're going for tendering approach, it can actually lead to investors flowing out. And this is exactly what happened in Ethiopia. I think coming back to Kenya, again, the importance of having a clear and transparent framework for procuring projects is, in my view, critical. Focusing on bankability. Look, again, so many projects have been banked in Kenya. The key instrument that protects investors against the political risk, which is called the letter of support, in my view, was actually one of the most lighter instruments in all countries which were attracting IPPs. From a country perspective, this is a very good product, right? I actually, one of my key message here is we need to focus on getting that back on, because this is what enables projects to be banked. PPAs, I think, as an investor here in Kenya, you actually take commercial risk, which is not the case in very many other countries. And that's because 𝐾𝐿C is paying its bills. And again, I think it should be commended that now IPPs are getting paid by 𝐾𝐿C. We enjoy great payment track records. This is fundamental to the sector. The health of 𝐾𝐿C is a very important aspect. Then when it comes to volume risk, right, and the demand risk, if the party that's controlling the demand is basically the national off-taker, then that risk largely needs to remain with the off-taker. And that's why the take or pay structure, in my mind, isn't bad, right? So I think there is a lot of experience across the continent, but sometimes I feel like we are looking at what's done elsewhere, whilst we have already so many projects that have been banked in Kenya. We know how to do this. There is maturity in the sector. The conversations that you have with the Ministry of Energy, with EPRA, with 𝐾𝐿C, with 𝐶ACHACO are very high-level conversations, quality conversations. So it's good to look around and see what else we can bring here as lessons learned. But I don't think we should shy away as Kenya to look at what we have done already and continue on that path. That would be my response to your question, sir.
Thank you very much for really going into detail. And I know Allan wants to chip in on this. Is something that obviously is burning with him. But Allan, as you expound on what Edouard has just said or complement that, could you also address the issues of what needs to be done even in our own country to shorten the time, and also to make sure that the PPAs are bankable? He has mentioned a few changes that needs to be done, but as you do that, the procurement process, the planning, and also to make sure that the time is shortened. Could you also deal with that, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the key point that has been made, and I would like to reiterate it, is everything we need to do to get to have investment, to attract investment, and to actually make this investment done in Kenya is available. It's really available. It has been done before. Engineer Ryungu is here. Savo Power was active for 20 years, and the IPP did not fail. So we've done it before. If anything, law has, let's say, improved over time. There've even been arbitration matters. So even the arbitration clauses in some of these PPAs have been tested. They've been, so what was I saying? Kenya remains a very attractive place from let's say, structure of the sector. The fact that you have unbundled sector, the fact that you have a credit-worthy and strong off-taker anchoring it. You have documentation in terms of the PPA and letter of support structure that's been tested by lenders. It's well known. I think, Chair, what I would comment here is what has crept in, let's say, over the last couple of years, as epitomized or as seen in the whole moratorium process, is some sense of paralysis in decision making. Just even if you identify an issue, and some of the issues I can speak of, for example, we believe, at least in discussions we've had from the ministry and from Kenya Power, they would like part of the tariff, let's say, paid in Kenya shillings. That's not the end of the world, at least for some investors. It is possible. So now that is an issue, how do we actually structure that? And I think there's enough capacity in sorry, I think as engineer, the music, anyway, small aside. So saying whether it's things like currency, if it's things like, and these are maybe details, but in terms of no IPP wants to have, if there's any curtailment, let's say, on the units that they produce, these things need to be defined and we structure around them. Because at the end of the day, we do not want to burden KPLC unduly or unfairly. But I think there needs to be an understanding that all this structuring does have costs, and those costs will reflect on the tariff. So my comment would be, speaking from on the investor side, is that this remains an attractive market. The structures for projects to succeed exists. What we need is clear, let's say, policy guidance and tone from the ministry and leadership, so that capital is fluid. What Edouard did not mention in some of these projects that we are dealing with in Ethiopia, where you're struggling to get money out, is that they were able at least to achieve very attractive tariffs, but those projects never went anywhere. So you can only imagine in the Kenyan situation, if you ran clear, disciplined processes that gave people a clear sense that this is happening, and there's no fun and games. You will have this tariff issue will be a thing of the past in my view, and at least speaking from Meridian's perspective, would be one of those who would be ready to compete in those processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Allan, and the rest of the panelists for. I just want to do maybe just a quick final round, and I'll start with Henry. You have heard some of the things that they have talked about, and from where you sit, what do we need to adjust? What market adjustments needs to be done to give investors clear visibility and confidence in the future of Kenya's generation landscape?
Thank you, Chair. I think we need. I think time is of essence, and we need to have a very clear policy guidelines where we do not have maybe parties that were not visible during the project discussions coming into play, and sort of putting roadblocks on the development of some of these projects. We need to have clear tax regime. I think that has been mentioned, where there is certainty of the tax laws and have longer term vision on how some of these projects can be developed and monetized. I think also time is of essence, and sometimes time changes things. And when you evaluate today's performance or projects based on historical values, sometimes we don't get a meaningful view of the tariff, as it were. Projects that are conceived now and funded now will have very different cash flows and project returns if you look at them 10 years down the lane. So I think for us as a nation, we need to give investors a clear guideline as to what is possible, what is not. And we also don't introduce external parties to really audit processes that were done by our preceding CEOs and executives and policymakers. Because when you create a sense of backlash into the future, then this paralysis that we are experiencing now is likely to continue longer because nobody wants to append his signature on a paper rest. Then you fall into problems going forward. But I think Kenya is ripe for new investment. And of course also for KPLC, I think we need to market electricity as a source of energy. I think currently marketing is not, we are queuing for electricity connection. I think we need to reverse that a little bit, KPLC to market the excess power so that if we grow the base, then even the cost of generation definitely will go down, and that I think becomes beneficial to all the consumers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm sure there will be a response on that particular item that you have just raised about marketing Kenya Power and the demand. But before, we are running out of time, so let me just go maybe to David. As the person in charge of network management, what key T&D investments are needed to unlock market development, particularly for the new industrial loads, the new modes of demand like e-mobility and the regional power trade? So what key T&D investments are needed in those areas?
Thank you. For the region, and maybe just from the experience we have, and if I go to the last question before the first, the experience we are getting after the interconnection with our neighboring countries, especially the latest line, Kenya-Tanzania, is that the stability of the two grids that connect needs to be almost at the same level, to mean that, and I think I mentioned earlier, the key investments that will really be very urgent right now are the ones that will be looking at voltage control and frequency control. So everything in between, from STATCOMs to variable compensators to load following plants. The second item will be key transmission interconnection within key load centers in the country. We've just already, of course, with upcoming expected uptake of an extra 200 megawatts by December 2026, for example, when we simulate how the grid will operate at the time, even though the main line can bring, the 𝐾𝐿 line can bring that power to the country, how the load centers are growing to bring that power to Nairobi requires either an upgrade of existing transmission lines and or new ones to create, second level or third level transmission rings for the city. For Mombasa, places like Mombasa where the load is also very high, we need quite a lot of course, the existing line currently is built at 400, but, operated at 220. We know that's going to change shortly as 𝐾𝐿 finishes Mariakani. So those investments that have to do with transmission and grid stabilization are going to be very key as the demand grows. Maybe on the area of market reforms, I know the earlier presentations by Esak CEO talking about the participation of private generators in the EAPP market. The market wasn't in the initial phase configured where private developers will sell directly. I know the request has come, but I wanted to make reference to the trading arrangement is such that the plants that are firmly contracted trade first. Then bilateral arrangements either between the countries trade second, then any other expected capacity above that is what then goes to the trade. So that then if an independent power producer will be having a contracted plant on the grid, the only thing they can sell at that time, unless the tariff regime changes such that, for example, you are not charging capacity, because if you're charging capacity, it means the power is taken whether or not it's paid, is to change the tariff regime so that then the power can be sold either through wheeling or otherwise. So I think all those things need to be put in place. And that then means that if our neighbors or anyone else out there will need power flowing either backwards from what we are seeing now, we will have to look at the configuration of those lines and maybe do the necessary investments to take that power. Before I just go off, I just wanted to also mention that the Kenyan market on the power purchase agreements, as has been mentioned, has been very stable, very attractive, despite challenges here and there, tariff pronouncements, delays in payments. As the off-taker, we've kept pulling the wagon and still making sure there is power being paid, money being paid to investors. So and I think I was the first, either last year, early or late 23. I think a lot of the developers in the room here were in 𝐾𝐽𝐿 when the former CS 𝐶𝐻𝐿 was addressing all the developers. And I remember and I wanted to make the point that of these attractive markets, there are certain things that we really need to be very honest about. When he mentioned the use of the open book, I hadn't known the term up to the time. The open book negotiation model for tariff and PPAs in general. I could see I don't want to use the word discomfort, but some bars in the room. And of course, later as we met and considered, and of course tried to look at other issues, including what Allan has mentioned, where we are asked, why do you tariff in USD? And now we had to come with a creative thinking around that same issue, where we said, look, if there are costs as a developer you're incurring in Kenya shillings, can we pay in that? And we are happy that a lot of developers are looking at that aspect and saying, okay, we may not give you the entire tariff in in Kenya shillings, but let's make this first step. And that's really helpful, even when we are discussing with policy makers, because it then means that we are shifting the discussion a bit. We are not disadvantaging the financiers or developers, but in any way. Regulator has pronounced themselves in terms of return. We ask developers as we negotiate, look, your 12% return on equity is guaranteed, and the other return on on your debt side. So I think maybe as we talk about cost, bankability, and everything in between, it's good to look at this market as an evolving market. We do not want no investor should be disadvantaged. But if there's an evolution to one step to within reality, still avail a tariff that is, acceptable to the country, very clearly analyzed. And I said earlier, I think if we went out there and we said, look, this is how this tariff was arrived at, and we've checked every shilling and every cent, and on the capex side, recent encounters also. We are seeing, the regulator is also, someone was asking me, regulator is asking us questions, and we don't take those questions for granted because they are for the country. If, for example, the biggest cost on any development is on the capex side, for example, are we able to verify the capex cost you've put in the financial model and confirm? Because the country is wired such that we go to a competitive process to develop the least cost on the side of any development we have. Can we tell the country, look, the capex is the biggest side to this. On my development, on the capex side, I've done a competitive process, and this is how I generated the $10 million. I think that will really help in, giving confidence that the tariff has been really developed through a very, very good process. So, Chair, those will be my comments, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sorry, we are completely out of time. These gentlemen will be available throughout. So if you want to engage them in any other of the other items, you can do so. And also, of course, ours was just setting the scene. Some of these items, some of the issues that we have raised, including finance, including all that, will be discussed in the future in the other panels later on today. So you have an opportunity. So what I would want to do is to thank my panel very, very much, and I would request you to join me as we thank them. Please give them a hearty clap. Thank you.